The thunder of an 80 shell tore through the fog-shrouded Ardennes forest as a monstrous German Tiger tank emerged from the mist. American soldiers scrambled for cover, their standard equipment no match for this armored behemoth. But then came an unexpected sound. The high-pitched whine of a Continental R-975 aircraft engine pushed to its limits. From the flank, a blur of olive drab streaked across the battlefield at nearly 60 miles per hour. The German tank commander barely had time to rotate his turret before the American M18 Hellcat's 7.60mm gun fired, its shell penetrating the Tiger's vulnerable side armor. For years, the fearsome German Tigers had hunted American armor with impunity. But in the frozen forests of Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge, the hunters became the hunted. This is the story of how America's fastest tank destroyer finally turned the tables in one of history's most lopsided armored duels. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It's incredible to see our historical community spread across the world. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each subscription helps us continue unearthing these fascinating stories that shaped our world. Now, let's get to the story. In the early years of World War II, the American military watched with growing concern as German panzer divisions sliced through Europe with terrifying efficiency. The shocking fall of France in just 6 weeks demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, that employed concentrated armor formations to punch through enemy lines, encircle opposing forces, and drive deep into undefended territory. The American response to this new form of warfare would take shape in an innovative but ultimately controversial doctrine, the tank destroyer concept. In April 1941, Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall directed his planners to develop a solution to counter German armored breakthroughs. The resulting strategy envisioned specialized, highly mobile units that would be held in reserve, ready to rush forward and ambush advancing enemy tank formations. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew D. Bruce was tasked with developing both the tactics and the ideal vehicle for this mission. Bruce's vision was clear and ambitious: create a fast, maneuverable platform with enough firepower to destroy enemy tanks, but without the heavy armor that would slow it down. Speed is armor became the unofficial motto of the nascent tank destroyer force. The early attempts at creating dedicated tank destroyers were stopgap measures at best, modified half-tracks and trucks equipped with anti-tank guns. These improvised weapons looked peculiar on the battlefield. American soldiers often joked that they resembled farm equipment more than military hardware. The M3 gun motor carriage, essentially a 75mm gun mounted on a half-track, proved woefully inadequate during the North African campaign. German tanks could easily outrange these early tank destroyers, and their minimal armor offered little protection for their crews. The casualties among these early tank destroyer battalions were alarmingly high, leading many to question whether the entire concept was fundamentally flawed. The M10 Wolverine, built on a Sherman tank chassis and introduced in 1942, represented a significant improvement, but still fell short of Bruce's vision. It mounted a powerful 3-inch 76.2mm gun that could threaten most German tanks, but it inherited the Sherman's mediocre mobility. Its open-topped turret made the crew vulnerable to artillery fragments and snipers, while its turret traverse was painfully slow, a critical disadvantage in the fast-paced armored engagements that characterized tank warfare. What Bruce wanted was not a modified tank, but a purpose-built machine designed from the ground up to hunt tanks, a true predator for the mechanized battlefield. By late 1942, with American forces engaged against the Afrika Korps in North Africa and preparing for the eventual invasion of Europe, the need for an effective tank destroyer became increasingly urgent. Reports from the front lines described German Tigers and Panthers decimating American tank formations, their powerful guns able to destroy Shermans before the American tanks could close to effective firing range. The Buick Motor Division of General Motors received the contract to develop what would become the M18, with specific instructions to prioritize speed and firepower over protection. In an unusual move for a military vehicle, Buick's publicity department gave it a name that matched its intended purpose, the Hellcat. The name was fitting for a vehicle designed to be an apex predator on the battlefield. The design process was meticulous and innovative, drawing on America's automotive expertise in ways that would have been impossible for the more regimented German war industry. Harley Earl, GM's legendary automotive designer, better known for stylish civilian cars, led the team that created the Hellcat's distinctive silhouette. Earl, whose design team was also responsible for developing early military camouflage patterns, approached the tank destroyer as he would a performance car, emphasizing sleek lines and an aggressive stance. Even the Hellcat's logo, featuring a wildcat biting down on crushed tank treads beneath the motto, "Seek, Strike, Destroy," was created by Earl's staff. The vehicle they produced was a marvel of American engineering, a tracked fighting vehicle that could reach highway speeds of 55-60 miles per hour, making it the fastest armored vehicle of World War II. To put this in perspective, the German Tiger tank struggled to reach 20-1 ideal terrain, and even today's M1 Abrams main battle tank is outpaced by the Hellcat. This remarkable speed came at a price, however. The Hellcat's armor was exceptionally thin, just half an inch at its thickest point, barely enough to stop small arms fire. Standard .30 caliber armor-piercing rounds could penetrate its turret at close range. Its open-topped turret left the crew exposed to snipers, grenades, and artillery fragments. But what the Hellcat sacrificed in protection, it gained in mobility and firepower. At the heart of the Hellcat was its 76mm gun, capable of penetrating the side and rear armor of German tanks at combat ranges. The gun's muzzle brake reduced recoil and helped maintain accuracy even when firing on the move, a critical capability for a vehicle that relied on hit-and-run tactics. Powering this swift predator was a Continental R975 radial aircraft engine delivering 400 horsepower through a 3-speed hydromatic transmission. The choice of an aircraft engine was unusual for an armored fighting vehicle, but perfectly aligned with the Hellcat's design philosophy, maximum power-to-weight ratio for unmatched acceleration and speed. The innovative torsion bar suspension system developed by Buick engineers provided a stable firing platform even at high speeds across rough terrain. Unlike the leaf spring suspensions common in many tanks of the era, the torsion bar system allowed each road wheel to move independently, absorbing bumps and dips without transferring the shock to the entire vehicle. This improved both crew comfort during long road marches and accuracy when firing, while stationary or on the move. Every aspect of the design prioritized Bruce's central tenet: speed equals survival. The Hellcat was not meant to stand and trade shots with German tanks. Its doctrine called for rapid movement, firing from unexpected positions, and then disappearing before the enemy could effectively return fire. A deadly game of hit and run. The crew of 5 operated as a tightly coordinated team, each with specific responsibilities. The driver sat at the left front of the hull, controlling the Hellcat's movement with an automotive-style steering wheel rather than the brake and clutch steering systems used in many tanks. Another innovation that made the vehicle more intuitive to operate for Americans familiar with civilian automobiles. Next to the driver sat the assistant driver, who operated the radio and served as a second pair of eyes during combat. The other 3 crew members, commander, gunner, and loader, worked in the turret. The commander, positioned on the left side of the turret, directed the vehicle's movement and coordinated the fire team while operating the 12.7-hour Browning M2 heavy machine gun, mounted on the turret ring for anti-aircraft and anti-personnel defense. The gunner and loader worked together to deliver the Hellcat's primary punch, the 76mm shells that could spell doom for enemy tanks. Production of the M18 began at Buick's plant in Flint, Michigan in July 1943. Workers who normally assembled civilian automobiles now found themselves building machines of war. The transition from designing luxury cars to tank destroyers might have seemed drastic, but America's automotive industry proved remarkably adaptable to the demands of wartime production. The first contract called for 1,000 Hellcats, followed by a second order for 1,800 more. By the time production ended in October 1944, a total of 2,507 Hellcats had rolled off the assembly line, far fewer than originally planned, but enough to equip many tank destroyer battalions heading to Europe. As these new weapons made their way overseas, their crews trained intensively in the tactics that would maximize the Hellcat's strengths while minimizing its vulnerabilities. Training for Hellcat crews emphasized speed, surprise, and coordinated action. Unlike tank units, which often engaged enemy forces directly, tank destroyer battalions were taught to operate more like ambush predators, setting up in concealed positions with good fields of fire, waiting for enemy tanks to expose their vulnerable sides or rear, striking decisively, and then relocating before the enemy could organize a counterattack. The open turret, while a vulnerability in some respects, provided excellent visibility, a crucial advantage for vehicles that relied on spotting the enemy first. Crews practiced rapid deployment from march column to firing positions, learning to transform a road-bound convoy into a deadly ambush in a matter of minutes. The M18 Hellcat first saw combat in Italy in early 1944, but its initial reception was mixed. The 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion at the Anzio beachhead chose not to deploy their new Hellcats, concerned that the thin armor would prove too vulnerable in the confined Italian terrain, where German infantry with handheld anti-tank weapons could easily approach within lethal range. This cautious approach highlighted one of the central tensions in the Hellcat's design. Its survivability depended on its ability to maneuver, but many battlefields offered limited room for such movement. It was in France, following the D-Day landings, that the Hellcat would begin to prove its worth, though often not in the role for which it had been designed. The expected massed German armored breakthroughs rarely materialized, and Hellcat crews frequently found themselves supporting infantry or serving as mobile artillery rather than engaging enemy tanks. The 76mm gun proved effective in the infantry support role, able to destroy machine gun nests, bunkers, and other defensive positions with its high explosive shells. However, this deviation from doctrine led to higher-than-expected casualties among tank destroyer units, as the tactics for infantry support were fundamentally different from those developed for tank hunting. When Hellcats did encounter German armor, the results could be spectacular, but they also revealed limitations in the vehicle's design. The 76mm gun, while adequate against the frontal armor of earlier German tanks like the Panzer IV, struggled to penetrate the thick, sloped armor of Panthers and Tigers at typical combat ranges. Ordnance tests back in the United States had claimed the gun could defeat a Tiger's frontal armor at ranges up to 2,000 yards, but these optimistic assessments failed to account for real-world conditions, angled armor, varying ammunition quality, and the difficulty of achieving perfect shot placement while under fire. Hellcat crews quickly learned that engaging German heavy tanks from the front was suicidal unless at extremely close range, and they developed tactics to target more vulnerable areas: the sides, rear, tracks, and engine compartments. The battle that would come to define the Hellcat's combat legacy began on September 19, 1944, near the small French town of Héricourt. The 4th Armored Division, supported by the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion with its M18 Hellcats, faced an unexpected counterattack from the 113th Panzer Brigade. The Germans, desperate to halt General Patton's advance toward Germany, had cobbled together this formation with new, inexperienced crews operating formidable Panther tanks. Mother Nature set the stage for what would become a textbook demonstration of the Hellcat's capabilities. A thick morning fog blanketed the battlefield, limiting visibility to mere yards. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper led a platoon of C Company's Hellcats toward the village of Rechicourt-le-Petit when, through the swirling mist, he spotted the unmistakable long-barreled 75mm gun of a German Panther just 30 feet away. Rather than retreat from this close encounter with a far more heavily armored opponent, Leiper seized the opportunity. He quickly deployed his platoon in advantageous positions and opened fire. What followed was one of the most one-sided tank engagements of the war. In just 5 minutes, Leiper's Hellcats knocked out 5 German tanks while losing only one of their own. As the engagement continued, the platoon destroyed 10 more enemy tanks at the cost of 2 more Hellcats. The hero of this action was Sergeant Henry R. Hartman, whose single M18 accounted for 6 Panthers, one of the most formidable tanks in the German arsenal. The fog that might have seemed an advantage for the attacking Germans instead worked in favor of the Americans. The limited visibility negated the Panthers' superior long-range gunnery, while the Hellcats used their speed and maneuverability to appear suddenly at close range, fire at the vulnerable side armor of the German tanks, and then disappear back into the fog before the enemy could effectively respond. By the end of the 3-day Battle of Hellcat, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had destroyed an astonishing 39 German tanks while losing only 7 of their own, a kill ratio of more than 5-to-1 against supposedly superior enemy armor. The veterans of Hellcat described the battle in almost predatory terms. "We hunted them like wolves," recalled one Hellcat commander. "You'd catch a glimpse of them through the fog, hit them hard in the flank, and then scoot away before they knew what hit them." Another crew member described the eerie experience of stalking the massive German tanks. "Those Panthers were twice our size, and their gun could tear through our armor like paper. But we had the advantage of surprise and speed. We'd find a good spot, wait for them to expose their sides, fire, and then we were gone before they could swing their turrets around." The lessons of Hellcat were clear. In the right circumstances, and with properly trained crews, the M18 Hellcat could be devastatingly effective against even the most powerful German tanks. The battle demonstrated exactly the kind of tactics that Lieutenant Colonel Bruce had envisioned for his tank destroyers, using speed and maneuverability to gain positional advantage, striking unexpectedly, and avoiding stand-up fights. The thin-skinned but lightning-fast Hellcat had proven it could more than hold its own when employed correctly. Following the success at Hellcat, word spread quickly through American forces about the Hellcat's capabilities. Crews became increasingly confident in their vehicles, developing tactics that maximized their advantages. They learned to use terrain features to create hull-down firing positions, exposing only the turret while keeping the more vulnerable hull protected behind earth berms or rubble. They coordinated their movements with infantry, who provided protection against enemy foot soldiers armed with anti-tank weapons. They practiced rapid fire and movement techniques, rarely staying in one position long enough for enemy artillery to zero in on their location. As autumn gave way to winter, the Allied advance that had seemed unstoppable after the breakout from Normandy ground to a halt along Germany's western border. The Wehrmacht, despite being pushed back on all fronts, was far from defeated. Adolf Hitler, determined to seize the initiative and turn the tide of the war, ordered a massive counteroffensive through the densely forested Ardennes region of Belgium, the same route German forces had successfully used in 1940. The resulting battle, which began on December 16, 1944, would become known to Americans as the Battle of the Bulge, and it would provide the ultimate test for the M18 Hellcat. The German offensive achieved complete surprise, attacking through terrain considered unsuitable for armored operations, and in weather that grounded Allied air support, German armor, and infantry smashed through thinly held American lines. Panic spread as rumors of elite SS troops in American uniforms infiltrating rear areas circulated among green units experiencing combat for the first time. The situation was dire enough that General Eisenhower, upon learning of the offensive, reportedly remarked, This time the Krauts have stuck their heads in a meat grinder. But even he could not have anticipated how challenging the coming weeks would be, nor the crucial role that the nimble Hellcats would play in blunting the German advance. The German plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, aimed to split the Allied armies by driving through the Ardennes to the port of Antwerp. If successful, it would cut off and destroy 4 Allied armies and force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. The offensive was spearheaded by the 6th Panzer Army, led by SS General Sepp Dietrich, with the mission of capturing the vital crossroads town of Bastogne before pushing on to the Meuse River. In the path of this formidable force stood scattered American units, including several equipped with M18 Hellcats. It seemed that the blitzkrieg tactics that had conquered Europe in 1940 might once again prove decisive. But this was not 1940, and the American Army of 1944 was a battle-hardened force with the equipment and training to recover from even this stunning initial setback. The confusion of the first days gradually gave way to a more organized defense, as senior commanders grasped the scope of the German offensive and rushed reinforcements to critical sectors. Among the units rushed forward to stem the German advance was the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats and attached to the 101st Airborne Division defending the critical transportation hub of Bastogne. The paratroopers, veterans of D-Day and Operation Market Garden, provided exceptional infantry support for the tank destroyers, while the Hellcats gave the airborne troops the anti-armor punch they needed to counter German tanks. It was a synergistic partnership that would prove crucial in the days ahead. North of Bastogne, near the town of Noville, a small force known as Team des Sobris from the 10th Armored Division found itself directly in the path of the 2nd Panzer Division, one of Germany's most elite armored formations. Reinforced by the 1st Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, of Band of Brothers fame, and elements of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, this undermanned American force faced overwhelming odds. The Germans attacked with over 40 tanks and nearly 2,000 infantry troops, expecting to quickly overwhelm the defenders and continue their drive toward Bastogne. On December 19-20, the Hellcats of the 705th played a crucial role in the defense of Noville. Using their speed to quickly relocate to threatened sectors and employing hull-down firing positions that minimized their exposure to enemy fire, the M18s took a heavy toll on attacking German armor. A Military Channel documentary credited these tank destroyers with knocking out 24 German tanks, including several feared Tigers, during this action. The Hellcats' ability to shoot and scoot, firing from one position and then rapidly moving to another, confused the German commanders and significantly disrupted their timetable. One Hellcat crew, commanded by Sergeant James Leach, accounted for 3 German tanks in less than 10 minutes during the fighting around Noville. "We'd fire and immediately relocate," Leach later recalled. "The Germans would target our previous position with artillery or tank fire, but we were already 100 yards away looking for our next shot." It drove them crazy. This defensive action, while ultimately resulting in a tactical withdrawal to Bastogne, successfully delayed the German advance by crucial hours, buying time for the 101st Airborne to strengthen Bastogne's defenses. As the Battle of the Bulge intensified, the weather conditions deteriorated. Heavy snowfall covered the battlefield, limiting mobility for all vehicles, but especially affecting the heavier German tanks. Here, the Hellcat's exceptional power-to-weight ratio proved advantageous, allowing it to navigate snow-covered roads and cross-country terrain more effectively than most armored vehicles. Crews learned to use this mobility advantage to set up ambushes along likely German approach routes, engaging enemy tanks from positions that would be difficult for heavier vehicles to reach. The intense cold created other challenges. The Continental radial engine that powered the Hellcat was difficult to start in sub-freezing temperatures, requiring crews to run their engines periodically throughout the night to prevent them from freezing solid. Ammunition had to be carefully managed, as resupply became increasingly difficult with German forces threatening supply routes. Fuel consumption, always high for the powerful engine, became a critical concern as the siege of Bastogne cut off normal supply channels. Yet despite these challenges, the Hellcats remained operational when many other vehicles succumbed to the harsh winter conditions. Throughout the Battle of the Bulge, Hellcat crews demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and courage. They had learned through hard experience that while their 70mm guns could not reliably penetrate the frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers beyond very close range, they could disable these fearsome opponents by targeting track assemblies, road wheels, or engine compartments. Once immobilized, German tanks could be finished off with shots to their more vulnerable side and rear armor, or simply bypassed and left for infantry armed with bazookas to destroy. The arrival of improved high-velocity armor-piercing (HVAP) ammunition in late 1944 somewhat addressed the Hellcat's firepower limitations, giving it a better chance against heavy German armor, though this specialized ammunition was never available in sufficient quantities. With its tungsten carbide penetrator, HVAP rounds could punch through a Tiger's side armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, and even had a chance against frontal armor at closer distances. When HVAP was unavailable, crews relied on careful shot placement and tactical positioning to overcome their firepower disadvantage. One of the most dramatic Hellcat actions during the Battle of the Bulge occurred near the town of Selles, where elements of the 2nd Armored Division intercepted the advancing 2nd Panzer Division. M18s of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion slipped around the flanks of the German column and attacked from unexpected directions, creating confusion and panic among enemy tank crews. A German tank commander, captured after the battle, described the psychological impact of the Hellcats' tactics. They seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. You would see a muzzle flash from a wooded area, lose a tank, and when you returned fire, they were gone. Minutes later, they would hit you from a different direction. It was maddening. As the Allied counterattack regained the territory lost during the initial German offensive, the Hellcats continued to prove their worth. Their exceptional speed allowed them to keep pace with the rapid advances of armored divisions like Patton's 4th Armored, which broke through to relieve Bastogne. In the confined terrain of the Ardennes, with its narrow roads winding through dense forests, the Hellcat's maneuverability gave it distinct advantages over heavier tanks. The winter conditions that had initially favored the German attackers by grounding Allied aircraft eventually worked against them, as fuel shortages immobilized many of their tanks, turning them into stationary pillboxes, prime targets for roving Hellcats. By January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge had ended in a decisive Allied victory. The German forces, having expended irreplaceable men and equipment in their desperate gamble, were pushed back to their start lines and beyond. The Wehrmacht had lost over 600 tanks and assault guns during the offensive, with M18 Hellcats accounting for a significant portion of these kills. Despite losses of their own, the tank destroyer battalions had convincingly demonstrated their value, albeit often in roles different from those originally envisioned. The success of the Hellcat during the Battle of the Bulge was all the more remarkable given the challenging conditions. Operating in temperatures that sometimes dropped below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, navigating snow-covered roads and trails, and often fighting with limited supplies and maintenance facilities, the M18 proved more resilient than its light construction might have suggested. The Continental Radial Aircraft engine, while fuel-hungry, delivered reliable power even in extreme cold, and the torsion bar suspension handled the frozen, rutted terrain admirably. The open turret, while exposing the crew to the elements, actually provided advantages in winter combat, offering better visibility and allowing the crew to spot approaching threats more easily than tanks with enclosed turrets that frequently fogged up in cold weather. As Allied forces pushed into Germany in the final months of the war, the Hellcat continued to serve with distinction. By this stage, German armor was increasingly scarce, and Hellcat crews found themselves employed more as assault guns and mobile artillery. In February 1945, a group of M18s attached to the 6th Armored Division was photographed next to a disabled German King Tiger tank, a powerful image symbolizing America's industrial and tactical triumph over what had once been the world's most fearsome armored force. The King Tiger, with its 150 meters of frontal armor and devastating 88mm gun, represented the apotheosis of German heavy tank design, emphasizing protection and firepower at the expense of mobility and reliability. The Hellcat, with its minimal armor and emphasis on speed, stood at the opposite end of the design spectrum. That the American vehicle could successfully engage and defeat such a formidable opponent validated the fundamental concept behind the tank destroyer, that with proper tactics, a lighter, more agile platform could overcome a heavier, more powerful adversary. As the war in Europe reached its final stages, the Hellcat battalions participated in the crossing of the Rhine and the push into central Germany. With German forces increasingly disorganized and fuel-starved, the speed of the M18 allowed it to exploit breakthroughs and pursue retreating enemy columns. While German tanks became rare targets, Hellcats found plenty of work engaging bunkers, artillery positions, and other defensive strongpoints that impeded the Allied advance. The versatility of the 76mm gun, which could fire high explosive and white phosphorus shells in addition to armor-piercing rounds, made the Hellcat an effective all-around combat vehicle during these final offensive operations. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the M18 Hellcat had established an impressive combat record. With 526 confirmed enemy tank kills across all theaters, 498 in Europe, 17 in Italy, and 11 in the Pacific, and a kill-to-loss ratio of 2.4 to 1, the Hellcat had proven to be the most effective American tank destroyer of the war. Despite its unconventional design compromises and the fact that the tank destroyer doctrine never fully aligned with battlefield realities, the Hellcat had succeeded through a combination of technical excellence and the adaptability of its crews. The story of the M18 Hellcat is more than just a tale of an innovative fighting vehicle. It reflects broader themes of American industrial might and pragmatic ingenuity. In just 4 years, the United States had gone from having virtually no armored fighting vehicles to producing some of the most effective tanks and tank destroyers in the world. The Hellcat embodied the American approach to warfare, emphasizing mobility, firepower, and the initiative of individual crews over the heavier, more methodical German designs. Perhaps the greatest testament to the Hellcat's effectiveness comes from the German forces who faced it in combat. Captured German tankers frequently expressed surprise at the speed and agility of the American tank destroyer. A Panther commander taken prisoner after an engagement near Frankfurt commented, "We were told the Americans had nothing that could match our tanks. Then these fast little devils appeared from nowhere, shot us in the side, and disappeared before we could bring our guns to bear." This combination of shock value and tactical effectiveness made the Hellcat one of the most feared American weapons on the Western Front. After World War II, the dedicated tank destroyer concept fell out of favor in the U.S. military. The distinction between tanks and tank destroyers blurred as main battle tanks evolved to fill both roles. The M18 was quickly retired from American service, though variants like the M39 armored utility vehicle would serve in the Korean War. Many Hellcats were provided to Allied nations under military assistance programs, with some remaining in service as late as the early 1990s. Yugoslavia received 260 Hellcats and kept some in reserve until the Yugoslav Wars, where they saw action with Serbian forces. One Hellcat was even employed on an armored train known as the Krajina Express during this conflict, a surreal second life for a World War II veteran vehicle. The Republic of China, Taiwan, received 214 M18s, and when the chassis and hulls wore out, repurposed the turrets onto M42 Duster anti-aircraft vehicles to create their Type 64 light tanks. A testament to the enduring value of the Hellcat's design. Greece operated 127 Hellcats from the early 1950s until the mid-1970s, initially organizing them into dedicated tank destroyer regiments. When the vehicles were finally retired from active service, many of their turrets were repurposed as static defensive positions along Greece's northern borders and on Aegean islands. Iran received 55 Hellcats in the 1950s, while the Philippine Army acquired 50 units and deployed at least one during the Korean War alongside its contingent of Sherman tanks. This widespread distribution and long service life of the M18 speaks to the fundamental soundness of its design. Despite being rushed into production during wartime and incorporating several revolutionary features, the Hellcat proved reliable and adaptable to a wide range of combat conditions. Its automotive components, derived from Buick's civilian expertise, were robust and easily maintained even by mechanics without extensive specialized training. The Continental radial engine, while thirsty for fuel, was a well-proven power plant with excellent reliability. Even the 76mm gun, despite its limitations against the heaviest German armor, was a versatile and accurate weapon system that remained effective against most battlefield targets. Today, the legacy of the M18 Hellcat lives on in the few surviving examples preserved in museums and private collections around the world. The American Armored Foundation in Danville, Virginia, maintains a beautifully restored Hellcat that still runs, occasionally demonstrating its remarkable speed at special events. The Museum of the American GI in College Station, Texas, houses another operational Hellcat that bears the scars of combat, a dent under its muzzle brake caused by a German bullet. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans features a Hellcat in its collection, allowing visitors to appreciate the compact dimensions and innovative design of this legendary vehicle. These remarkable machines serve as reminders of a time when American engineering rose to meet an existential threat, producing vehicles that helped turn the tide of the greatest conflict in human history. The M18 story is one of adaptation and overcoming, a lightweight underdog vehicle that proved it could take on and defeat the mightiest tanks the Third Reich could produce. In a war often characterized by industrial might and overwhelming numbers, the Hellcat's success represents a victory of quality over quantity, of tactical innovation over brute force. The Hellcat crews who fought from the hedgerows of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes and ultimately into the German heartland were not just operating a unique fighting vehicle, they were demonstrating the qualities that defined the American contribution to victory in World War II: resourcefulness, technical innovation, and the courage to take on seemingly superior opponents. When the moment of truth came in the fog-shrouded fields of Aracourt or the snow-covered roads of the Bulge, the M18 Hellcat proved that sometimes speed is indeed the best armor, and that with the right tactics and training, even a lightweight contender can defeat a heavyweight champion. The human stories behind the Hellcat's combat record reveal the extraordinary courage and resourcefulness of the American soldiers who crewed these vehicles. Many were young men from automotive backgrounds, mechanics, drivers, and factory workers who brought their civilian expertise to the battlefield. They modified their vehicles with additional storage racks, improved gun sights, and better crew amenities. They developed their own tactics based on first-hand experience rather than relying solely on doctrinal manuals. They formed close-knit teams where each member understood not just his own role, but could step into others if casualties occurred. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole of the 3rd Armored Division exemplified the skill and daring of Hellcat crews. During his 3 months of combat before being severely wounded, Poole was credited with destroying no fewer than 12 German tanks and numerous other vehicles and defensive positions. His aggressive but calculated approach to tank destroyer operations earned him the nickname War Daddy among his fellow soldiers. Poole's exploits demonstrated that in the hands of a skilled crew, the Hellcat could dominate the battlefield despite its technical limitations. As we reflect on the Hellcat's remarkable combat record, we're reminded that warfare is never solely determined by technical specifications on paper. The human element, the training, morale, and tactical acumen of the crews often proves decisive. The M18 Hellcat, despite its thin armor and limited main gun effectiveness against the heaviest German tanks, achieved success through the skill and adaptability of its crews, who learned to maximize its strengths while minimizing its vulnerabilities. In the end, the Hellcat's legacy is not just as an innovative fighting vehicle, but as a symbol of American industrial ingenuity and the fighting spirit of the greatest generation who turned this swift predator into one of the most effective tank killers of World War II. The tactical evolution of Hellcat operations throughout the war reflects the learning process that characterized American military efforts as a whole. Early deployments often adhered strictly to doctrine, with tank destroyer battalions held in reserve as a mobile anti-tank force. As experience accumulated, commanders at all levels adapted their approach, integrating Hellcats more closely with combined arms teams of infantry, tanks, and artillery. By the war's end, the most successful tank destroyer units operated as flexible fire support platforms, able to shift rapidly between anti-armor, infantry support, and indirect fire missions as the tactical situation demanded. This adaptability extended to the individual vehicle level as well. Crews modified their Hellcats based on combat experience, adding sandbags to the hull front for additional protection, though this compromised the vehicle's speed advantage, installing improvised armor shields around the open turret to reduce vulnerability to snipers and shell fragments, and developing improved ammunition stowage systems that allowed for faster reloading in combat situations. Unit maintenance sections fabricated additional external storage bins for crew equipment, rations, and spare parts, making the Hellcats more self-sufficient during extended operations. As the war in Europe wound down, a few Hellcats were deployed to the Pacific Theater, where they faced a very different combat environment. The Japanese Army fielded tanks that were far lighter and less well-armored than their German counterparts, making the Hellcat's 76mm gun more than adequate for anti-tank work. However, the jungle terrain and narrow roads of many Pacific islands limited the M18's mobility advantage, and the open turret made crews particularly vulnerable to Japanese infiltration tactics and close-range infantry attacks. As a result, Pacific Hellcat units operated more conservatively than their European counterparts, relying heavily on infantry protection and engaging targets for maximum range when possible. The final tally of the Hellcat's wartime performance is impressive by any standard. Beyond the raw numbers of enemy tanks destroyed, the psychological impact of the M18 on German forces was significant. Its high speed and ability to appear unexpectedly created an outsized impression of American armored capabilities. German unit reports frequently overestimated the number of Hellcats they faced, and tank crews became increasingly hesitant to advance when M18s were known to be operating in an area. This deterrent effect, while difficult to quantify, represented a real operational advantage for Allied forces. As the last operational Hellcats were finally retired from service around the world in the early 1990s, they had long outlived both the doctrine that spawned them and most of their contemporaries. Today, modern main battle tanks bear little resemblance to the lightweight speedster that was the M18, yet they incorporate lessons learned from its operational history. The balance between protection, firepower, and mobility remains at the heart of armored vehicle design, with different nations emphasizing different aspects of this eternal triangle. The M18 Hellcat, with its radical prioritization of speed over armor, represented one extreme in this spectrum, an approach that proved remarkably effective in its time and continues to influence military thinking today. In an era of increasing vehicle weights and ever thicker armor, some modern military planners look back to the Hellcat as a model for future light-armored vehicles. The concept that survival depends more on avoiding hits than absorbing them has found new expression in vehicles like the Stryker mobile gun system and various wheeled tank destroyers employed by armies around the world. Advanced materials, improved power plants, and computerized fire control systems allow these modern descendants of the Hellcat to maintain the same philosophical approach while addressing many of the original's shortcomings. In military museums from Fort Benning to the Sloan Museum in Flint, Michigan, surviving M18 Hellcats stand as silent witnesses to a pivotal moment in armored warfare history. Their sleek lines and distinctive open turrets tell the story of a different approach to tank design, one that valued the ability to deliver the first hit over the capacity to absorb enemy fire. For the veterans who crewed these machines, the Hellcat represented both vulnerability and opportunity, a vehicle that could not withstand a direct hit from enemy tanks, but could deliver deadly strikes from unexpected positions. The historical debate over the effectiveness of the tank destroyer concept continues among military historians, with the Hellcat often serving as Exhibit A for both proponents and critics. Those who argue that the concept was fundamentally flawed point to the fact that specialized anti-tank vehicles were ultimately replaced by main battle tanks capable of fulfilling multiple roles. Those who defend the concept highlight the Hellcat's impressive kill ratio and argue that the problem lay not in the vehicle itself, but in how it was employed, often in roles for which it was never designed. Perhaps the fairest assessment comes from the Hellcat crews themselves. A veteran of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, reflecting on his wartime experience, summed it up. "We knew our Hellcats couldn't stand toe-to-toe with a Panther or Tiger. That wasn't the point. We used what we had: speed, maneuverability, and surprise. When we stuck to that, we won. When we didn't, we paid the price." This pragmatic approach, focusing on capabilities rather than limitations, characterized the American way of war and helps explain how a seemingly outmatched vehicle could achieve such remarkable success. The ultimate vindication of the M18 Hellcat came not in the strategic concepts that led to its creation, but in its tactical successes on the battlefield. When American tank destroyers finally had the opportunity to hunt back against the feared Tigers and Panthers of the Wehrmacht, they proved that American engineering and fighting spirit could overcome even the most formidable German armor. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, where the fate of Europe hung in the balance during those desperate December days of 1944, the lightning-fast vengeance of the Hellcat helped turn the tide of Hitler's last gamble, ensuring that the Allied advance toward Germany would continue unabated toward final victory.